On the 27th of August 1967, Brian Epstein was found dead here in his house. He was 32 years old. At the inquest, the death was recorded as an accidental overdose of sleeping tablets. Yet many today believe it was suicide. Could this be possible? But why? Why should Brian Epstein, the man who brought the world the Beatles, why should he decide to end it all? It was a fateful day in November 1961 when Brian walked into Liverpool's Cavern Club. He was there to check out a band called the Beatles. Wow, he thought, who is this scruffy foursome? In between their joshing, smoking and gum chewing, they were playing songs that made his spine tingle. By 1963, he was managing the most famous pop group in the world, and he'd made them all very rich. In December 1964, Brian bought this house, just 5 minutes walk from Buckingham Palace. His housekeeper and chef lived in the basement. On the ground floor, he would hold lavish parties for the Beatles and other members of pop royalty. He felt he had arrived. But 2 years later, things started to unravel. Back in August 1966, the Beatles ended their third American tour with a concert in San Francisco. Never again, they said. They were wrung out. And they were now going to concentrate on their recording careers. Brian was also pretty wrecked by the experience. He had a team of loyal advisors and assistants that had struggled to delegate all but the most menial tasks. And yet now, with the Beatles spending most of their time holed up in their recording studios, Brian was feeling increasingly redundant. What was he supposed to do without a frenetic tour to organise? Then there was that disastrous deal he'd struck for the Beatles' merchandising rights. I won't consider less than 10%, he'd declared. Now, to be fair to him, this happened much earlier on when he was new to the management game. How was he to know that he should have asked for 6 or 7 times as much? But when he realised that he'd lost them all millions of pounds of potential income, the guilt was very hard to bear. And all the time, there was that other secret he was keeping from the world. The Beatles knew, of course, so did everyone else in his close circle. But Brian could not admit to the world at large that he was gay. For a start, he was committing a criminal offence. Homosexuality in Britain was not legalised until July 1967, just a few weeks before his death. And it's not as if he was engaged in a discreet, mutually loving relationship. Mostly, he preferred his sexual encounters to be quick, rough and impersonal. He'd already been in trouble with the law for his toilet assignations. In October 1965, the Queen awarded special honours to all 4 Beatles, MBEs. They were now entitled members of the British Empire. None was awarded to Brian Epstein. Was it because they know I'm homosexual, he thought? Or is it because I'm Jewish? Paul McCartney did publicly declare that MBE should stand for Mr. Brian Epstein. This statement provided a small amount of comfort, but he still felt stung by being left out. Brian was feeling increasingly lonely. He found one escape route at the card table. He was a regular at the Claremont Club, the high-stakes casino frequented by London's louche aristocracy. Here he would join the other gamblers as they threw away thousands of pounds, all washed down by large gloves of vodka. Brian embraced the drug culture of the day. He regularly smoked marijuana to help him relax. One evening, he invited the Beatles and a few other friends to a party at his house. Once seated, Brian passed around a silver platter containing sugar cubes laced with LSD. He would take drugs to keep him awake. This often led to violent rages where he'd smash his possessions to smithereens. and then he needed more drugs to help him sleep. He knew he needed help, so in May 1967, Brian checked in for a week's stay at the Priory, a London rehab clinic, favoured by the famous and wealthy. Although 2 days later, he was to take a day pass out to return home so he could host the launch party of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. On Friday 25th of August 1967, Brian drove 60 miles to his country house, where he was to host a weekend party for a group of friends. The Beatles didn't attend. They were in Wales studying meditation with the Maharishi Yogi. Then, on Saturday morning, for reasons we'll never know, Brian drove back here to his London home. He went straight up to his second-floor bedroom and locked himself in. On Sunday morning, his housekeeper raised the alarm. The police were called, his door was knocked down, and there they found Brian Epstein lying motionless on his bed. The results of the inquest were clear. It was an accidental overdose. Too many sleeping pills taken the night before, coupled with alcohol. And this was on top of a large amount of barbiturates already in his system. "No way!" cried many on hearing this verdict. "He was murdered," claimed some. Their theory was the Cray twins, those notorious East London gangsters, had tried to blackmail Brian. After failing at this, they decided to bump him off instead. Now, there is very little evidence to support this assertion. Definitely suicide, said others. A total cover-up. Now, we all know that Brian Epstein was a very troubled man, still firmly stuck in the closet, addicted to drugs and gambling. And then, let's not forget, those unfinished suicide notes that were found by his bed. Utter nonsense. It was 100% an accident, claimed Brian's closest friends. So what if he changed his mind and returned home, and then locked himself in his bedroom with strict orders not to be disturbed? That was nothing unusual for him. It was just how he behaved. Only a few days before his death, he'd been on the phone to the Beatles, talking excitedly about their forthcoming project, the Magical Mystery Tour. And about the same time, he'd sent a photo to his best friend, Nat Weiss, in New York, showing him happily sunbathing on his rooftop. And what's more, his father, Harry, had died 5 weeks previously. Yes, Brian had taken it hard, but he was more concerned about taking care of Queenie, his grief-stricken mother. There's absolutely no way he'd do something to put her through even more hell. And as for those suicide notes, they were just scraps, perhaps indicative of a previous mood, but were hardly left there on purpose. If Brian had intended to kill himself, he would have surely tidied up his affairs beforehand. In fact, he hadn't even made a will. Now, these arguments are certainly persuasive. It doesn't seem plausible that Brian, while entertaining weekend guests in his country house, took the decision to drive back to London in order to take his own life. But then, suicide is often not a result of careful planning. I clearly remember 2 conversations with people who had made failed suicide attempts. One was a woman who had been rescued from drowning after her boyfriend mercilessly dumped her. "I don't remember thinking about ending it all," she told me. "I just felt compelled to keep on walking into the sea, into the waves." Another man told me a similar tale about when he'd had his stomach pumped after taking an overdose. "I wasn't trying to kill myself, you know. I was feeling depressed and extremely drunk. I just found myself eating one Valium after another without really thinking what I was doing." Whatever was actually going through Brian Epstein's mind remains a mystery, but it also remains a very, very sad story. The day after his body was found, a fan laid 5 red carnations on the top step outside his front door. There was a note left next to it with a roughly scrawled message that said, "We love you too." What a shame that Brian never really understood this. I hope you enjoyed watching my film. Please tick the like button if you did. To hear about my next films, please subscribe to my channel, Hello London Life. Until next time, thank you. Bye.